Vous, ô frères, que les actes et non les mots soient votre ornement. Ô frères, que les actes et non les mots soient votre ornement. Ô frères, que les actes et non les mots soient votre ornement. Ô frères, que les actes et non les mots.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Sina, so much for getting us into the mood. Ladies and gentlemen from all across the world, or Europe and other places, welcome, welcome, welcome to another exciting episode of The Dawnbreakers. Right, I'm going to give you a quick recap as per usual. If you remember, the last thing we'd covered in our previous session was this fact that Mullah Ali al-Nahri wanted to have a baby. His brother Mirza Ibrahim asked the Bab if he could help. The Bab had given some food. He had the food. A baby was born who would then go on to be the wife of Abdul Baha. We then find that the Bab, who is in Esfahan, is currying a lot of favor with a lot of people. Some people absolutely love him. However, this has another effect. The ulamas, the clergy, are not happy. They band together and they write this death warrant, basically, and ask people to sign it. Haji Sayyid Asadullah, who was the son of Mullah Baghir Rashdi, who previously Mullah Hussein had gone to Esfahan and got the support of, who was supporting the Sheikh Ahmad, the Sheikhi movement, Sheikh Ahmad and Sayyid Kazim. His son didn't embrace the Bab, however, he also didn't sign this death warrant. Another person was Haji Muhammad Jafar Abadi, who also said, no, I'm not going to do that. The Imam Jameh, who the Bab stayed with for 40 days, was very close with the Bab. He, however, was a little bit scared. He didn't know what to do because the Prime Minister, Haji Mirza Agassi, had written to him saying, please stop associating with the Bab. He wanted to keep his position. What he did do is he wrote that the Bab has done nothing wrong, but I think the claims that he's making are a little bit too extravagant. So this death warrant was put together. The governor, whom the Bab was staying at his house, Manasher Khan, he had caught wind of this, and he devised this plan where he said he was going to take none other than the Bab out of the city. And he was going to do this by a grand display of 500 units of army, basically, of man and horse, who were going to go with the Bab and take. At every 4.18 miles, roughly, 100 of them would peel back. So they were going to go up in the direction of Tehran. They're heading up north. Every 4.18 miles, roughly, that's quite specific. People would turn back, 100 of them, until they got to the fourth stop, where 400 of them returned. Then from there, every maidan, so every square, which is a subfraction of this Farasang, 20 of them would peel off. They'd peel off, they'd peel off, they'd peel off, until it got down to the last 20. The last 20 would then head to a place called Ardistan, which is over here. They would go to Ardistan to take taxes, and the other 10, the trusted, would then bring the Bab back into the private residence of Manusher Khan. Now, this residence was known as Imarat Khurshid. So they bring him in secretly. It's great, he's there. No one is allowed to see the Bab. However, the governor begs the Bab on behalf of Mullah Abdul Karim and says, please, can he come in? Mullah Abdul Karim, the one who had the dream, are you seeking the year 60? He was an amanuensis of the Bab. So he's allowed to come in shortly after Sayyid Hussein Yazdi and Sheikh Hassan al-Zunisi are also able to join him. So while he's there, the governor turns around and says to the Bab, Manusher Khan, he turns around and says, look, I believe in you. I want to give you all my wealth. And not only that, I'm going to go in and see the king. And I'm going to get Haji Mirza Agassi, the prime minister. I'm going to get him sacked. I'm also going to try and get the sister, one of the sisters of the Shah, to marry you. And I will conduct this wedding. Don't worry, leave it to me. The Bab says, thank you very much for your noble intentions. You, however, are going to be dead in 3 months and 9 days. The Bab then says to him, thank you very much. I see you're trying to help, you're trying to support. A will is left by Manusher Khan, giving everything to His Holiness the Bab. Unfortunately, his nephew, who then takes over, someone by the name of Gurgan Khan, he comes in, destroys the will, takes all the property, and that's it. Nothing is then later on left to the Bab. Gurgan Khan finds out, however, that His Holiness the Bab is there in Esfahan, in the house of Manusher Khan, in the house of Manusher Khan. What does he do? He writes a letter to the Shah, telling the Shah that, look, Manusher Khan was holding His Holiness the Bab. What shall we do to him? The king realizes that Manusher Khan had intended to introduce the Bab to the king. The Bab actually writes a letter to the king as well and says, let me come and see you and let me defend myself in front of all the ulama, in front of all the clergy. So this was what was meant to happen. From Isfahan, he was told to send the Bab up in disguise. So again, he's a Sayyid Ali Muhammad. He'd be wearing green. Some people would have an idea of who he may be. There was all this talk. So they said, send him up in disguise. They then get somebody by the name of Chaparchia Beg. So they get Chaparchia Beg to take the Bab along with the rest of the army and start heading up towards Isfahan. The Bab, before this happens, tells Mullah Abdul Karim, he tells Sayyid Hassan Yazdi, Sayyid Hussein Yazdi, and Sheikh Hassan Zunusi, his brother. Not his brother, Sheikh Hassan Zunusi, these three people. He says to them, look, go now. He says, leave because things are going to get bad. Go to Kashan, to Qom, and also to Tehran. Once this happens, we know that Muhammad Bega Chaparchi is going to be taking the Bab up north. Now, Muhammad Bega Chaparchi belonged to the sect of the Aliullahs, who was a very fair guy, and he was trying to take the Bab up. That then takes us into our next chapter, which is chapter 11, the Bab stay in Kashan. We know when he goes to Kashan, he meets none other than Haji Mirza Jania Kashani. Now, this merchant had a dream that the Bab was going to stay at his house for 3 days. Lo and behold, that's exactly what happens. The Bab comes, they have a conversation, the Bab stays with them for 3 days. It's a very beautiful story, but we covered that in our last chapter. We know that Sayyid Hussein Yazdi was invited to the house of Haji Mirza Jani, who met the Bab there as well. And then somebody by the name of Sayyid Abdul Baghi also meets the Bab. He hears the Bab expound on some verses and write this tablet. However, he doesn't recognize who the Bab is. Later on, he recognizes who the Bab is and is absolutely distraught. Doesn't know what to do, and he just lives in seclusion for the rest of his life. We know that Haji Mirza Jania Kashani, this incredibly intelligent, beautiful, good-looking, handsome man, relative of mine, he actually, it said that he wasn't schooled very much. So he was the DJ of his time. He apparently has conversations with powerful people such as Mullah Jafar Naragi, this clergy, and he managed to confound his arguments because of the writing of the Bab. As we then go from Kashan, we head up to Qom. In Qom, we know we have the Haram, I must pronounce this right, the Harama Masumeh, which is this beautiful holy sanctuary, which is the sister of Imam Reza in Mashhad. So very beautiful. They say to the Bab, listen, you're not allowed to enter any cities, but we will allow you to go into the Harama Masumeh if you want. The Bab says, listen, I'm absolutely and utterly in love with Masumeh. There's no doubt about this. It's a very revered place. However, I choose not to go in because the people of Qom around it have actually just brought it into disrepute, and I choose not to go there. Bear in mind, if the Bab had have gone there, he could have been in the inviolable sanctuary. He could have tried to hide and run. He decides that he's not going to do that, but not out of disrespect. He very much reveres this place. He then goes on to a place called Gomrod. Now, Gomrod is a place where Muhammad Bega Chaparchi, the person in charge of the army, he actually has a lot of family there, and people there are from the states of Aliullah, and he stays there for a while and talks about how beautiful the people were in this village. From there, he heads up towards a place called Kenargerd. When he goes to Kenargerd, there he stays. He receives a letter from Haji Mirza Aghasi telling him to go to a place called Kul Ain. Now, Kul Ain we know to be the home of Sheikh Kulaini, who had written certain traditions and the Usula Kafi and about the coming of the Ghaib. He stays there for a while, and Mullah Muhammad Mehdi Akandi comes from Tehran, and he comes bearing gifts from Baha'u'llah and a letter from Baha'u'llah. And the Bab gets ecstatic. He's absolutely happy with what he receives. Whilst he's in Kulain, we then hear of this story related by Mullah Abdul Karim, who talks about one day they wake up and the Bab had disappeared. Now, this place, Kenargerd, is 28 miles roughly south of Tehran. They were looking for the Bab. Everyone was panicked. Whereas Muhammad Bega Chaparchi, the leader, said, look, there's no way the Bab would run away. I'm not worried, there's no way. We see the Bab then coming back from that direction. People question, what could it be? Did he meet Baha'u'llah? Did he not Baha'u'llah? Abdul Baha states that they did not meet, not physically, anyway. So that happened. Then we know 2 weeks later, there's a letter from Muhammad Shah saying that His Holiness the Bab is not going to be meeting the king in Tehran. However, he will be going to a place called Markul, which is right in the northwestern corner. Up here is Markul. and he's going to stay there, and he's going to be looked after by someone by the name of Ali Khan, who's the governor of Marko, and is also the brother-in-law of Haji Mirza Agassi. That's as far as we got, ladies and gentlemen. If there's any comments or questions, we'll tackle them now. If not, we're going to roll on to our next section.
Haji Mirza Agassi was no doubt responsible for having induced Muhammad Shah to address such a communication to the Bab. He was actuated solely by a sense of fear, lest the contemplated interview should rob him of his position of unquestioned preeminence in the affairs of the state, and should lead eventually to overthrow from power. He entertained no feelings of malice or resentment toward the Bab. He finally succeeded in persuading his sovereign to transfer so dreaded an opponent to a remote and sequestered corner of his realm, and was thus able to relieve his mind of a thought that continually obsessed him. How stupendous was his mistake! How grievous his blunder! Little did he realize at that moment that by his incessant intrigues he was withholding from his king and country the incomparable benefits of a divine revelation which alone had the power to deliver the land from the appalling state of degradation into which it had fallen. By his act, that short-sighted minister did not only withhold from Muhammad Shah the supreme instrument with which he could have rehabilitated a fast declining empire, but also deprived him of that spiritual agency which would have enabled him to establish his undisputed ascendancy over the peoples and nations of the earth. By his folly, his extravagance, and perfidious counsels, he undermined the foundations of the state, lowered its prestige, sapped the loyalty of his subjects, and plunged them into an abyss of misery. Incapable of being admonished by the example of his predecessors, he contemptuously ignored the demands and interests of the people, pursued with unremitting zeal his designs for personal aggrandizement, and by his profligacy and extravagance involved his country in ruinous wars with its neighbours. Sadi Maaz, who was neither of royal blood nor invested with authority, attained, through the uprightness of his conduct and his unsparing devotion to the cause of Muhammad, so exalted a station that to the present day the chiefs and rulers of Islam have continued to reverence his memory and to praise his virtues, whereas Buzurg Mir, the ablest, the wisest, and the most experienced administrator among the viziers of Nushirvan Adel, in spite of his commanding position, eventually was publicly disgraced, was thrown into a pit, and became the object of contempt and the ridicule of the people. He bewailed his plight and wept so bitterly that he finally lost his sight. Neither the example of the former nor the fate of the latter seemed to have awakened the self-confident minister to the perils of his own position. He persisted in his thoughts until he too forfeited his rank, lost his riches, and sank into abasement and shame. The numerous properties which he forcibly seized from the humble and law-abiding subjects of the Shah, the costly furnitures with which he embellished them, the vast expenditures of labour and treasure which he ordered for their improvement, all were irretrievably lost after he had issued his decree, condemning the Bab to a cruel incarceration in the inhospitable mountains of Azerbaijan. All his possessions were confiscated by the state. He himself was disgraced by his sovereign, was ignominiously expelled from Tehran, and fell a prey to disease and poverty. Bereft of hope and sunk in misery, he languished in Karbala until the hour of his death. The Bab was accordingly ordered to proceed to Tabriz. The same escort, under the command of Muhammad Beg, attended him on his journey to the northwestern province of Azerbaijan. He was allowed to select one companion and one attendant from among his followers to be with him during his sojourn in that province. He selected Sayyid Hussein Yazdi and Sayyid Hassan, his brother. He refused to expend on himself the funds provided by the government for the expense of that journey. All the allowances that were given by the state he bestowed upon the poor and needy, and devoted to his own private needs the money which he, as a merchant, had earned in Bushehr and Shiraz. as orders had been given to avoid entering the towns in the course of the journey to Tabriz. A number of the believers of Qazvin, informed of the approach of their beloved leader, set out for the village of Siyah Dihan and were there able to meet him.
Haji Mirza Aghasi, the prime minister, he was very much scared of His Holiness the Bab meeting Muhammad Shah. He thought perhaps if this happens, maybe he'll lose his rank, his position. So it's understood that he's the one actually behind the letter that Muhammad Shah sent, saying, go to Marku. We also know, as I previously mentioned, that Ali Khan was the brother-in-law of Haji Mirza Aghasi. So the plan really was to keep the Bab up in Marku, up here, where he would be out the way and hopefully be forgotten about. Just keep him incarcerated. That was the plan that they'd devised. It's then spoken that the Bab actually in his teachings, his writings, could have been of great help to Iran. It wasn't a case of that they were trying to detract and sort of change the government. This wasn't a political movement. It was something that could have very much helped. Aghasi had then been engaging in essentially ruinous wars with his neighbors. We know that there were certain wars with the Russians and things like that had taken place. Then we talk about these two characters that the Guardian decides to bring in. And Sa'd Maj, who's the son of Maj, is a character from before the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from what I understand. He was this lowly guy who had achieved great things and was very much commended by the community, the Muslim community later on, for his work. So he was someone who was a very low-ranking guy. He wasn't related to the royalty or the government or anything like that, but he's someone very lonely, had achieved this great station. He had accepted the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Then we talk about the person on the other side is Bozorg Mir, who was this minister. And he was there, and he was one of the ministers of the king, Nishravana Adil, and he was a really powerful guy, and he just turned away and wasn't interested in the rest of it. And this guy ended up falling. He lost everything he had. He ended up being miserable, being alone, and even loses his sight. So the Guardian is setting this up, I think. He's talking about these two characters, and he's saying that even though this existed, and Haji Mirza Aghasi would have known that this existed in a previous dispensation, the ushering in of that with Islam coming in, this didn't make any difference to him whatsoever. Aghasi carried on with his madness. He ended up, unfortunately, sending the Bab to Azerbaijan. And it's once he sends the Bab to Azerbaijan, this is when everything falls, and we know that he ends up with nothing and ends up in Karbala. From there, we know that the Bab is heading to Tabriz. He's told that he's going to go up to Tabriz. As he's doing so, he's told that he can take two people, one companion and one attendant. The companion he takes is Sayyid Hussein Yazdi, and the attendant is Sayyid Hassan, his brother. The expenses of this trip, believe it or not, were covered by the Bab. The Bab, who had been a merchant down in Bushehr, down in this area here, he had saved his money, and along his way, he gave his money to the poor, to the needy, and he decided to pay for this trip himself. People in Qazvin wanted to meet His Holiness the Bab, but they couldn't because they weren't allowed to go into any big cities, so they end up going to the village of Siyah Dihan.
Sorry if I missed something, you might have been explained already, but these two characters that I mentioned here, one of them is Sa'd Maz.
Sa'd Maz, yeah.
And the other one is Bozorg Mir. Are these characters from the time of Muhammad?
From just before Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I think that's when they started off, correct.
Oh, okay, I wasn't quite sure.
One of them who was a lowly, sort of lowly guy, just a regular Joe, if you like, yeah. He ends up being very much revered for the way his conduct is and the way he's praised, from what I understand. The second one, however, was this minister who was just after worldly possessions and the rest of it, and he ends up losing the plot, basically, and not embracing Islam and going down, as far as I understand.
Thank you, Dave.
One of them was Mullah Iskandar, who had been delegated by Hujjat to visit the Bab in Shiraz and to investigate his cause. The Bab commissioned him to deliver the following message to Sulaiman Khan Afshar, who was a great admirer of the late Sayyid Kazim. He whose virtues the late Sayyid unceasingly extolled, and to the approach of whose revelation he continually alluded, is now revealed. I am that promised one. Arise and deliver me from the hand of the oppressor. When the Bab entrusted this message to Mullah Iskandar, Sulaiman Khan was in Zanjan and was preparing to leave for Tehran. Within the space of 3 days, that message reached him. He failed, however, to respond to that appeal. 2 days later, A friend of Mullah Iskandar had acquainted Hujjat, who, at the instigation of the ulamas of Zanjan, had been incarcerated in the capital with the appeal of the Bab. Hujjat immediately instructed the believers of his native city to undertake whatever preparations were required and to collect the necessary forces to achieve the deliverance of their master. He urged them to proceed with caution and to attempt at an appropriate moment to seize and carry him away to whatever place he might desire. These were shortly joined by a number of believers from Qazvin and Tehran who set out according to the directions of Hujjat to execute the plan. They overtook the guards at the hour of midnight and, finding them fast asleep, approached the Bab and begged him to flee. The mountains of Azerbaijan too have their claims, was his confident reply as he lovingly advised them to abandon their projects and return to their homes. Approaching the gate of Tabriz, Muhammad Beg, feeling that the hour of his separation from his prisoner was at hand, besought his presence and with tearful eyes begged him to overlook his shortcomings and transgressions. The journey from Esfahan, he said, has been long and arduous. I have failed to do my duty and to serve you as I ought. I crave your forgiveness and pray you to vouchsafe me your blessings. Be assured, the Bab replied, I account you a member of my fold. They who embrace my cause will eternally bless and glorify you, will extol your conduct and exalt your name. The rest of the guards followed the example of their chief, implored the blessings of their prisoner, kissed his feet, and with tears in their eyes bade him a last farewell. To each the Bab expressed his appreciation of his devoted attentions and assured him of his prayers in his behalf. Reluctantly, they delivered him into the hands of the governor Tabriz, the heir to the throne of Muhammad Shah. To those with whom they were subsequently brought in contact, these devoted attendants of the Bab and eyewitnesses of his superhuman wisdom and power recounted with awe and admiration the tale of those wonders which they had seen and heard, and by this means helped to diffuse in their own way the knowledge of their new revelation. The news of the approaching arrival of the Bab at Tabriz bestirred the believers in that city. They all set out to meet him, eager to extend to so beloved a leader their welcome. The officials of the government into whose custody the Bab was to be delivered refused to allow them to draw near and to receive his blessings. One youth, however, unable to restrain himself, rushed forth barefooted through the gate of the city, and in his impatience to gaze upon the face of his beloved, ran out a distance of half a farsang towards him. As he approached the horsemen who were marching in advance of the Bab, he joyously welcomed them, and seizing the hem of the garment of one among them, devoutly kissed his stirrups. Ye are the companions of my well-beloved, he tearfully exclaimed. I cherish you as the apple of my eye. His extraordinary behavior, the intensity of his emotion amazed them. They immediately granted him his request to attain the presence of his master. As soon as his eyes fell upon him, a cry of exultation broke from his lips. He fell upon his face and wept profusely. The Bab dismounted from his horse, put his arms around him, wiped away his tears, and soothed the agitation of his heart. Of all the believers of Tabriz, that youth alone succeeded in offering his homage to the Bab and in being blessed by the touch of his hand. All the others had perforce to content themselves with a distant glimpse of their beloved, and with that view sought to satisfy their longing. When the Bab arrived at Tabriz, he was conducted to one of the chief houses in that city, which had been reserved for his confinement. A detachment of the Nasiri regiment stood guard at the entrance of his house. With the exception of Sayyid Hussein and his brother, neither the public nor his followers were allowed to meet him. This same regiment, which had been recruited from among the inhabitants of Khamsi and upon which special honors had been conferred, was subsequently chosen to discharge the volley that caused his death. The circumstances of his arrival had stirred the people of Tabriz profoundly. A tumultuous concourse of people had gathered to witness his entry into that city. Some were impelled by curiosity. Others were earnestly desirous of ascertaining the veracity of the wild reports that were current about him. And still others were moved by their faith and devotion to attain his presence and to assure him of their loyalty. As he walked along the streets, the acclamations of the multitude resounded on every side. The great majority of the people who beheld his face greeted him with a shout of Allahu Akbar. Others loudly glorified and cheered him. A few invoked upon him the blessings of the Almighty. Others were seen to kiss irreverently the dust of his footsteps. Such was the clamor which his arrival had raised, that a crier was ordered to warn the populace of the danger that awaited those who ventured to seek his presence. Whosoever shall make any attempt to approach the Sayyid Bab, went forth the cry, or seek to meet him, all his possessions shall forthwith be seized, and he himself condemned to perpetual imprisonment.
The Bab is going to be going from this place here, just near Tehran, up to Markul, but en route to Tabriz. So we know that the Ghazvin Babis, as I said, they, Ghazvin being over here, they had met the Bab at Siyar Dihan. We then know that Mullah Iskandar, now this character Mullah Iskandar was the one who is asked by Hojat in Zanjan to go and investigate the Bab. This guy, he went down, spent time with the Bab, and then came back and he said to Hojat, he said, look, I've got some writings. I don't know if I should believe in the Bab. And Hojat went crazy at him and said, what are you doing? You should decide by yourself if this is a manifestation of God, not based on what I say. So this Hojat was charged by the Bab to take a letter to a man named Solomon Khane Afshar. The Bab has asked him to come and free him, essentially. He says, look, I want you to do this. He gets the message, and this guy is a big fan of Sayyid Kazim in Karbala. Previously, he very much respected him, but he just doesn't respond. He gets this letter 3 days later, doesn't respond. 2 days later, we know that a friend of Mullah Iskandar acquaints Hojat with the news. Now, Hojat, at this moment, is incarcerated. He's in Tehran. He's in prison. He's been put in prison. And it said that, can you come and do something? He then contacts his people in Zanjan, where he's from, and he says to them, look, you need to do this mission. So from Zanjan, and joined by some people from Ghazvin, they basically overtake the guards and they go to free the Bab. The Bab then says, the mountains of Azerbaijan also have their claim. Now, this is something that was prophesied in the Baha'i, this book of traditions, where it said that he would end up in the mountains of Azerbaijan. So sure enough, he goes up into Azerbaijan. Muhammad Beg, eventually, as they're approaching Tabriz, realizes that he's no longer going to be with the Bab, and he's very sad indeed. And he says to the Bab, listen, please forgive me for any discourtesy I may have done or anything, just begging him to say, look, I maybe didn't do as well as I could. And think how crazy it is. This guy who's taking his orders directly pretty much from the king, transporting this prisoner, is so in love with the prisoner and just heaps praise and praise upon him. The Bab turns around and just gives him love and says, look, we will exalt your station, and we very much cherish what you have done for us. So there's a bit of, I don't know if there's Torah going on there and say, no, you did well, you did well, but very much Muhammad Beg Chaprachi is in love with the Bab, and the Bab speaks to him very, very kindly. He's going to be given into the custody of the heir to the throne. The heir to the throne is, of course, Nasruddin Shah. Currently, the king is Muhammad Shah. So whilst they're approaching Tabriz and they're in the Tabriz vicinity, we know that there's many people who wanted to come and see the Bab. They really were desperate to see the Bab. But again, this is like, news has spread around Iran that there's a youth from Shiraz who's claimed to be X, Y, and Z, and they see this person coming in, and some of them are very excited. Everyone wanted to see him, but no one was allowed, apart from one youth who manages to run a grand distance of about 2 miles to go and see His Holiness the Bab. And he runs, and as he gets close to even the guards who are around the Bab, drops down and kisses the stirrups. And he's just like, I can't believe you are acquainted with the apple of my eye. Such is his love. Eventually, the Bab goes and gives him a hug, and he just starts crying, absolutely and utterly moved by this. They then are taken to the house of a chief in Tabriz. Taken to this house, no one was allowed at all to see him. The only people that were with the Bab, Sayyid Hussein and his brother Sayyid Hassan, these two amanuenses of the Bab. So he's taken there, and then so many people want to see him, and in the streets they're shouting out, Allahu Akbar! Some of the people are kissing the dust of the Bab that's walked past. They're blown away. A lot of people are really rallying around. A town crier then comes out, ringing his bell, and says, ladies and gentlemen, whoever, if they try and even approach the Bab to try and see him, all your possessions will be confiscated, and you'll have life imprisonment. But again, anywhere the Bab's going, remember there's some people who are in love with him, and the love grows, but then the story happens again when people are again. Any comments or questions?
I have one, Dave.
Yes, Sandra.
I do not understand why the Bab would commission Mullah Iskandar to deliver a message to, I'm not too really good with the names, Suleiman
Khan.
Yeah. Why would he ask him to deliver the message saying, come and rescue me, and then when they came, to turn them away?
This is a brilliant question, and it's one that's perplexing me, I'll be honest with you. I've sort of read and reread it, and it doesn't quite make too much sense. There is this hadith that he will go to Azerbaijan unless the Bab wants to make the point that Azerbaijan has its claims, unless the Bab wants to make the point that he could have been freed, but he's chosen to go there. We know when Manasher Khan says, I worry about what's going to happen to you, the Bab says, listen, I have chosen to have the pain inflicted on me by my enemies. So I don't know if it's something like that. It does seem a bit strange to me, and I don't know if anyone has the exact answer. Why he would ask Suleiman Khan. Maybe it was Suleiman Khan in particular that should have carried this out. Not entirely sure.
Dave, I have a question.
Yes, Lee.
So, did Muhammad Shah request to meet the Bab? And then, because I understand that it was going to take place, but then Al-Qasi tried to prevent it from happening.
The Dawnbreakers talks about Muhammad Shah, who's in Tabriz. Whilst the Bab is in Esfahan, it said that the Muhammad Shah realizes that Manasher Khan wanted to put the Bab in contact with the king. We also know that when Vahid down in Shiraz had accepted the mission of the Bab, Muhammad Shah says, okay, well, maybe we should investigate. So I think Muhammad Shah was very much open to investigating this. We also know there's a letter from the Bab to the Shah requesting a meeting with him and saying, bring all the Bab, bring all the clergy as well, and I'll speak to you all. So it seems to be a bit of both. Any other comments or questions?
Just one practical one. Going back to, I don't remember the name of the person that just asked the question, but there was Mullah Iskandar who was given this message to Suleiman Khan Afsar, but Suleiman Khan Afsar never responded. How do we know what this message was?
The Bab gave the message to Mullah Iskandar. So Mullah Iskandar, I assume, would have been interviewed by Nabil, and that's how we know what the message was.
On the day after the Bab's arrival, Haji Mohammed Taghiya Milani, a noted merchant of the city, ventured together with Haji Ali Asghar to interview the Bab. They were warned by their friends and well-wishers that by such an attempt, they would not only be risking the loss of their possessions, but would also be endangering their lives. They refused, however, to heed such counsels. As they approached the door of the house in which the Bab was confined, they were immediately arrested. Sayyid Hassan, who at the moment was coming out from the presence of the Bab, instantly intervened. I am commanded by the Sayyid Bab, he vehemently protested, to convey to you this message. Suffer these visitors to enter, inasmuch as I myself have invited them to meet me. I have heard Haji Ali Asghar testify to the following. This message immediately silenced the opposers. We were straight away ushered into his presence. He greeted us with these words. These miserable wretches who watch at the gate of my house have been destined by me as a protection against the inrush of the multitude who throng around the house. They are powerless to prevent those whom I desire to meet from attaining my presence. For about 2 hours we tarried with him. As he dismissed us, he entrusted me with 2 cornelian ringstones, instructing me to have carved on them the 2 verses which he had previously given to me, to have them mounted and brought to him as soon as they were ready. He assured us that at whatever time we desired to meet him, no one would hinder our admittance into his presence. Several times I ventured to go to him in order to ascertain his wish regarding certain details connected with the commission which he had entrusted me. Not once did I encounter the slightest opposition on the part of those who were guarding the entrance of his house. Not one offensive word did they utter against me, nor did they seem to expect the slightest remuneration for their indulgence. I recall how, in the course of my association with Mullah Hussein, I was impressed by the many evidences of his perspicacity and extraordinary power. I was privileged to accompany him on his journey from Shiraz to Mashhad and visited with him the towns of Yazd, Tabas, Bushriye, and Turbat. I deplored in those days the sadness of my failure to meet the Bab in Shiraz. Grieve not, Mullah Hussein confidently assured me. The Almighty is no doubt able to compensate you in Tabriz for the loss you have sustained in Shiraz. Not once, but 7 times can he enable you to partake of the joy of his presence, in return for the one visit which you have missed. I was amazed at the confidence which he uttered those words. Not until the time of my visit to the Bab in Tabriz, when, despite adverse circumstances, I was on several occasions admitted into his presence, did I recall those words of Mullah Hussein and marvel at his remarkable foresight. How great was my surprise when, on my 7th visit to the Bab, I heard him speak these words: "Praise be to God who has enabled you to complete the number of your visits and who has extended to you his loving protection."
The day after the Bab is in Tabriz, we know that Haji Muhammad Taghi Milani and Haji Ali Asghar managed to go into Tabriz to meet the Bab. Now remember, no one was allowed to meet the Bab. The town crier had said, if you come to meet the Bab, you'll have everything stolen and the rest of it. So they decide, right, we're going to go and meet the Bab. These 2 crazy souls who decide to go in. And just as they're there, the guard who's outside decides to arrest him. That's right, they're going to arrest this guy. And this is a guard, by the way, who later on belongs to the regiment that ends up killing the Bab. So he starts arresting him, and out comes Sayyid Hassan, one of the amanuenses. He comes out and he says, look, the Bab has said they are his guests and he's meant to come. Now, who is the Bab? The Bab's a prisoner, but for some reason this magic seems to work and they're allowed to come inside. They come in and they stay with the Bab for 2 hours. His Holiness the Bab says, I'm going to give you these 2 cornelian rings. There are some verses that I want you to put on it. They ended up going to see the Bab as they wanted, as they pleased, a few times they'd come and go. Then we hear Haji Ali Asghar, one of the 2, who recounts this story. When he was traveling with Mullah Hussein, he was traveling along from Shiraz to Mashhad, and he visited some of the towns along the way. He visited Yazd, Tabas, Bushriye, and Turbat. So he's going from all the way down from here, from Shiraz to Mashhad. He's going along the way. So he visits a whole bunch of towns, ending up in Turbat over here. And there's something that he said to Mullah Hussein. He said, look, I'm so sad I missed the Bab in Shiraz. I can't believe the Bab was there. Why didn't I see him? Mullah Hussein to him says, grieve not. Grieve not. 7 times you will get to meet him. Now, what a strange thing to say, that he says, don't worry about it, but not once, but 7 times you will meet him. Anyway, Haji Ali Asghar is going to see the Bab about this ring. And then we know on the 7th visit, the Bab turns around and says, praise be to God, who has enabled you to complete the number of your visits and has extended to you your loving protection. How incredible is it that Mullah Hussein had the foresight to know that he would visit him 7 times? Absolutely amazing. And then the Bab confirms this. 7, of course, we know is the same number of letters as the Bab has in his name, Ali Muhammad.
The Bab's incarceration in the castle of Maku. Sayyid Hosseini Yazdi has been heard to relate the following. During the first 10 days of the Bab's incarceration in Tabriz, no one knew what would next befall him. The wildest conjectures were current in the city. One day I ventured to ask him whether he would continue to remain where he was or would be transferred to still another place. Have you forgotten, was his immediate reply, the question you asked me in Esfahan? For a period of no less than 9 months we shall remain confined in the Jabal-e-Basit, from whence we shall be transferred to the Jabal-e-Shadid. Both these places are among the mountains of Khoi and are situated on either side of the town bearing that name. 5 days after the Bab had uttered this prediction, orders were issued to transfer him and me to the castle of Maku and deliver us into the custody of Ali Khan Markoui. The castle, a solid 4-towered stone edifice, occupies the summit of a mountain at the foot of which lies the town of Markou. The only road that leads from it passes into that town, ending at a gate which adjoins the seat of government and is invariably kept closed. This gate is distinct from that of the castle itself. Situated on the confines of both the Ottoman and Russian empires, this castle has been used in view of its commanding position and strategic advantages as a center for reconnoitering purposes. The officer in charge of that station observed in time of war the movements of the enemy, surveyed the surrounding regions, and reported to his government such cases of emergency as came under his observation. The castle is bounded on the west by the rivers Araxes, which marks the frontier between the territory of the Shah and the Russian Empire. To the south extends the territory of the Sultan of Turkey, the frontier town of Bayazid, being at the distance of only 4 farsangs from the mountain of Markou. The frontier officer in charge of the castle was a man named Ali Khan. The residents of the town are all Kurds and belong to the Sunni sect of Islam. The Shias, who constitute the vast majority of the inhabitants of Persia, have always been their avowed and bitter enemies. These Kurds particularly abhor the Sayyids of the Shia denomination, whom they regard as the spiritual leaders and chief agitators among their opponents. Ali Khan's mother, being a Kurd, the son was held in great esteem and was implicitly obeyed by the people of Markou. They regarded him as a member of their own community and placed the utmost confidence in him. Haji Mirza Aghasi had deliberately contrived to relegate the Bab to so remote, so inhospitable, and dangerously situated a corner of the territory of the Shah, with the sole purpose of stemming the tide of his rising influence and of severing every tie that bound him to the body of his disciples throughout the country. Confident that few, if any, would venture to penetrate that wild and turbulent region occupied by so rebellious a people, he fondly imagined that his forced seclusion of his captive from the pursuits and interests of his followers would gradually tend to stifle the movement at its very birth and would lead to its final extinction. He was soon made to realize, however, that he had gravely mistaken the nature of the revelation of the Bab and had underrated the force of its influence. The turbulent spirits of this unruly people were soon subdued by the gentle manners of the Bab, and their hearts were softened by the ennobling influence of his love. Their pride was humbled by his unexampled modesty, and their unreasoning arrogance mellowed by the wisdom of his words. Such was the fervor which the Bab had kindled in those hearts that their first act every morning was to seek a place whence they could catch a glimpse of his face, where they could commune with him and beseech his blessings upon their daily work. In cases of dispute, they would instinctively hasten to that spot, and with their gaze fixed upon his prison, would invoke his name and adjure one another to declare the truth. Ali Khan several times attempted to induce them to desist from this practice, but found himself powerless to restrain their enthusiasm. He discharged his functions with the utmost severity and refused to allow any of the avowed disciples of the Bab to reside, even for one night, in the town of Markou. For the first 2 weeks, Sayyid Hussein further related, no one was permitted to visit the Bab. My brother and I alone were admitted to his presence. Sayyid Hassan would, every day, accompanied by one of the guards, descend to the town and purchase our daily necessities. Sheikh Hassan Zunuzi, who had arrived at Markou, spent the night in a masjid outside of the gate of the town. He acted as an intermediary between those of the followers of the Bab, who occasionally visited Markou, and Sayyid Hassan, my brother, who would in turn submit the petitions of the believers to their master and would acquaint Sheikh Hassan with his reply. One day, the Bab charged my brother to inform Sheikh Hassan that he would himself request Ali Khan to alter his attitude towards the believers who visited Markou and to abandon his severity. Tell him, he added, I will tomorrow instruct the warden to conduct him to this place. I was greatly surprised by such a message. How could the domineering and self-willed Ali Khan, I thought to myself, be induced to relax the severity of his discipline? Early the next day, the gate of the castle being still closed, we were surprised by a sudden knock at the door, knowing full well that orders had been given that no one was to be admitted before the hour of sunrise. We recognized the voice of Ali Khan, who seemed to be expostulating with the guards, one of whom presently came in and informed me that the warden of the castle insisted on being allowed admittance into the presence of the Bab. I conveyed his message and was commanded to usher him at once into his presence. As I was stepping out of the door of his antechamber, I found Ali Khan standing at the threshold in an attitude of complete submission, his face betraying an expression of unusual humility and wonder. His self-assertiveness and pride seemed to have entirely vanished. Humbly and with extreme courtesy, he returned my salute and begged me to allow him to enter the presence of the Bab. I conducted him to the room which my master occupied. His limbs trembled as he followed me. An inner agitation which he could not conceal brooded over his face. The Bab arose from his seat and welcomed him. Bowing reverently, Ali Khan approached and flung himself at his feet. Deliver me, he pleaded, from my perplexity. I adjure you by the Prophet of God, your illustrious ancestor, to dissipate my doubts, for their weight has well nigh crushed my heart. I was riding through the wilderness and was approaching the gate of the town, when it being the hour of dawn, my eyes suddenly beheld you standing by the side of the river, engaged in offering your prayer. With outstretched arms and upraised eyes, you were invoking the name of God. I stood still and watched you. I was waiting for you to terminate your devotions that I might approach you and rebuke you for having ventured to leave the castle without my leave. In your communion with God, you seemed so wrapped in worship that you were utterly forgetful of yourself. I quietly approached you. In your state of rapture, you remained wholly unaware of my presence. I was suddenly seized with great fear and recoiled at the thought of awakening you from your ecstasy. I decided to leave you, to proceed to the guards and reprove them for their negligent conduct. I soon found out to my amazement that both the outer and inner gates were closed. They were opened at my request. I was ushered into your presence and now find you, to my wonder, seated before me. I am utterly confounded. I know not whether my reason has deserted me. The Bab answered and said, what you have witnessed is true and undeniable. You belittled this revelation and have contemptuously disdained its author. God, the All-Merciful, desiring not to afflict you with his punishment, has willed to reveal to your eyes the truth. By his divine interposition, he has instilled into your heart the love of his chosen one and caused you to recognize the unconquerable power of his faith. This marvelous experience completely changed the heart of Ali Khan. These words had calmed his agitation and subdued the fierceness of his animosity. By every means in his power, he determined to atone for his past behavior. A poor man, a sheikh, he hastily informed the Bab, is yearning to attain your presence. He lives in a masjid outside of the gate of Marku. I pray you that I myself be allowed to bring him to this place, that he may meet you. By this act, I hope that my evil deeds may be forgiven, that I may be enabled to wash away the stains of my cruel behavior towards your friends. His request was granted, whereupon he went straight away to Sheikh Hassan al-Zunuzi and conducted him to the presence of his master. Ali Khan set out within the limits imposed upon him to provide whatever would tend to alleviate the rigor of the captivity of the Bab. At night, the gate of the castle was still closed. In the daytime, however, those whom the Bab desired to see were allowed to enter his presence, were able to converse with him and to receive his instructions. As he lay confined within the walls of the castle, he devoted his time to the composition of the Persian Bayan, the most weighty, the most illuminating and comprehensive of all his works. In it, he had laid down the laws and precepts of his dispensation, plainly and emphatically announced the advent of a subsequent revelation, and persistently urged his followers to seek and find him whom God would make manifest, warning them lest they allow the mysteries and illusions in the Bayan to interfere with their recognition of his cause.
A beautiful story. One of my favorite stories actually takes place here. Said Hussein Yazdi is speaking to the Bab in Tabriz, and he says, look, what's the plan? Do you know what's going to be happening to us? You know, they're up in Tabriz. And the Bab says, yes, I've told you that we're going to spend 9 days in Marku. Well, the Bab knows, he predicts that in Marku, in this prison up here, is where they're going to spend 9 days. Sure enough, 5 days later, a message is sent that the Bab will now be taken along to Marku. He's there. Now, what's special about this area is that, one, it's kind of at the edge of Iran, so it's kind of up in the corner. It's also an area that's filled with Kurds who are Sunnis. And this area is also an area that's good for reconnoitering purposes, you know, to sort of keep an eye out on the Iraqis, on the Russians, what was going on. But one thing very particular was the Sunni Kurds didn't necessarily get on with the Shiites, and they disdained Sayyid, so someone who was a descendant of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. they weren't into this whole thing. So it was hoped that by putting the Bab there, that would cause issues. Now we know Ali Khan, who was the governor of Marku, his mum was also a Kurd. So he was cool, everyone would listen to him. And his one job was to keep people away from the Bab. And this is why, you know, he was deliberately put up in the corner. They were hoping that this would wrap things up. Unfortunately for them, as we know, people love the Bab. They started turning every time they'd have discussions, they'd try and catch his face in the morning. If they had an argument, for example, the two seniors, if they're talking about which is the most talented, they'd both look and invoke the name of the Bab and say, which senior is more talented, me or him, what's going on? You know, they would start turning to the Bab. Now, Ali Khan, his job was to stop this happening. So he said, look, stop people, stop. He also didn't allow any disciples of the Bab to come into Marku. No one was allowed to enter. Remember, it was just His Holiness the Bab, and it was Sayyid Hussein and his brother Sayyid Hassan. So these two were the only people that were allowed inside. Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi wants to come and meet the Bab. And Sayyid Hassan's the brother who's basically going back and forth in Marku to the outer of the city to meet any of the pilgrims. And the Bab says, go and tell Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi that I am going to summon Ali Khan to come here. Ali Khan, the big powerful? Okay. And then we hear of this beautiful, beautiful vision, this change in fortunes that take place. Sure enough, as reported by the Sayyid, he suddenly sees Ali Khan coming up to the prison in Marku. Now, what's happened here? What has gone on? Ali Khan recounts a story. He says, look, earlier on today, I was on my horse, I was going around, and I heard this noise, this beautiful, beautiful noise. And I think to myself, what is this noise? I then get off my horse. I go closer and closer. And I see that by the river, there's this beautiful noise coming out. Who could it be? I saw the Bab. Now, Ali Khan's thinking, I don't get this, because the Bab is a high prisoner in this prison, and he's meant to be up there. All of a sudden, he's down by the river, and he's chanting prayers. He was so enraptured and so in love with it that he didn't have a go at Sayyid Ali Muhammad the Bab. He just kind of listened. But then he thought, I know, I'm going to go back to the mountain and I'm going to go to the prison fortress and I'm going to go crazy. So the first set of people he sees, he starts shouting at the guard, what are you doing? Why did you let the Bab out? Right, that's it. You're done. You're fired. And they look at each other like, what's wrong with this guy? Like, he's better enough. Could be there. Like, I don't understand what's going on. He goes up to the next set of guards, starts shouting at them. There were 2 guards and 4 dogs at every stage. And he starts screaming and shouting. He's like, what's happened here? Is your wife not making your soup in the morning? Screaming at them, why you let the Bab out? And they're like, we didn't let the Bab out. What's going on? Goes to the final place as he's standing and he's shouting at these 2 guards and these 4 dogs. Remember, the prison of the Bab, where the Bab was, there was no light at night. And he also had no door on his cell. And he goes up and he starts screaming and he's shouting at them, why did you let the Bab out? What are you doing? I told you shouldn't have let... All of a sudden, he pauses. He pauses because he realized the Bab is in the prison. He's absolutely blown away by this. He's completely not only blown, and he bows down and he says to the Bab, I just saw you. I saw you down by the... You were praying. And the Bab makes a point and says, don't think for a second if I wanted to magic myself away from here, I couldn't, words to that effect. And he said, now he's completely changed. And he's like, I'm humble, like, I'm in, like, I don't understand. And the Bab says, no, you guys can't keep me here. If I want to move, I can move. Don't worry about that. And yes, it was me that you saw down by the river. He's now so blown away and just has his head down, bowed in submission to the Bab. I'm so sorry. He says, oh, there's a guy, a Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi, I think is his name, who's out at the city gate. Can I go and get him to meet you? So as the Bab said that this would happen, he then goes and he gave Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi, who he then knows is involved in transcribing a lot of the writings, who's then brought in and is able to meet the Bab. The Bab in that period writes the Persian Bayan in the 9 months that he's there. There's 9 commentaries on the Quran that are written. The fortunes have changed, even though the Bab is up here in Marku and things are meant to be terrible for him. Ali Khan is now on board.
What were the cornelian rings about? Why was that mentioned? Or is that just something that's not important?
I think the important thing there is the fact that there were 7 meetings. For the significance of the cornelian per se, I wouldn't put too much weight on that.
Okay, thank you.
Just to remind you, Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi, this is the person back in Karbala where the Bab is in one of the lectures of Sayyid Kazim. And Sayyid Kazim says, it will be as clear as this ray of light that lands on the lamp. Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi is the one who witnesses that and sees. Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi is the one who goes with Sayyid Kazim at night to go and see the Bab. He goes to this youth's house, the Bab then gives him this drink from a silver cup, they drink it. He wonders, wait, who is this guy? Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi is constantly thinking, Who is this person? Who is this person? Another time he sees the Bab, the shrine of Imam Hussein, saying the prayer, the one that I always say, this, "Oh God, my beloved, my heart's desire." This is where that prayer was revealed. Everyone starts crying and the Bab's crying hysterically. So Sheikh Hassan al-Sunusi has seen the Bab many times. We know that while he's in Kabbalah, later on he finds out that a youth in Shiraz has proclaimed to be Baha'i. So he then now heads all the way up to see the Bab. He goes all around and he heads up in Marku and he's trying to see the Bab in Marku. So this is the guy we're talking about.
I have heard Sheikh Hassan al-Sunusi bear witness to the following. The voice of the Bab, as he dictated the teachings and principles of his faith, could be clearly heard by those who were dwelling at the foot of the mountain. The melody of his chanting, the rhythmic flow of the verses which streamed from his lips, caught our ears and penetrated into our very souls. Mountain and valley re-echoed the majesty of his voice. Our hearts vibrated in their depths to the appeal of his utterance. The gradual relaxation of the stern discipline imposed upon the Bab encouraged an increasing number of his disciples from the different provinces of Persia to visit him in the castle of Maku. An unceasing stream of eager and devout pilgrims was directed to its gates through the gentleness and leniency of Ali Khan. After a stay of 3 days, they would invariably be dismissed by the Bab with instructions to return to their respective fields of service and to resume their labors for the consolidation of his faith. Ali Khan himself never failed to pay his respects to the Bab each Friday and to assure him of his unswerving loyalty and devotion. He often presented him with the rarest and choicest fruit available in the neighborhood of Maku, and would continually offer him such delicacies as he thought would prove agreeable to his taste and liking. In this manner, the Bab spent the summer and autumn within the walls of that castle. A winter followed of such exceptional severity that even the copper implements were affected by the intensity of the cold. The beginning of that season coincided with the month of Muharram of the year 1264 AH. The water which the Bab used for his ablutions was of such icy coldness that its drops glistened as they froze upon his face. He would invariably, after the termination of each prayer, summon Sayyid Hussein to his presence and would request him to read aloud to him a passage from the Muhur Kul Ulum, a work composed by the late Haji Mullah Mehdi, the great-grandfather of Haji Mirza Kamuluddin Naraki, in which the author extols the virtues, laments the death, and narrates the circumstances of the martyrdom of the Imam Hussein. The recital of those sufferings would provoke intense emotion in the heart of the Bab. His tears would keep flowing as he listened to the tale of the unutterable indignities heaped upon him, and of the agonizing pain which he was made to suffer at the hands of a perfidious enemy. As the circumstances of that tragic life were unfolded before him, the Bab was continually reminded of that still greater tragedy which was destined to signalize the advent of the promised Hussein. To him, those past atrocities were but a symbol which foreshadowed the bitter afflictions which his own beloved Hussein was soon to suffer at the hands of his countrymen. He wept as he pictured in his mind those calamities which he who was to be made manifest was predestined to suffer. Calamities such as the Imam Hussein, even in the midst of his agonies, was never made to endure. In one of his writings, revealed in the year 60 AH, the Bab declares the following: "The spirit of prayer which animates my soul is the direct consequence of a dream which I had in the year before the declaration of my mission. In my vision, I saw the head of the Imam Hussein, Sayyid Shuhada, which was hanging upon a tree. Drops of blood dripped profusely from his lacerated throat. With feelings of unsurpassed delight, I approached that tree and, stretching forth my hands, gathered a few drops of that sacred blood and drank them devoutly. When I awoke, I felt the Spirit of God had permeated and taken possession of my soul. My heart was thrilled with the joy of his divine presence, and the mysteries of his revelation were unfolded before my eyes in all their glory." No sooner had Muhammad Shah condemned the Bab to captivity amid the mountain fastness of Azerbaijan than he became afflicted with a sudden reverse of fortune, such as he had never known before and which struck at the very foundations of his state. Appalling disaster surprised his forces that were engaged in maintaining internal order throughout the provinces. The standard of rebellion was hoisted in Khorasan, and so great was the consternation provoked by that rising that the projected campaign of the Shah to Herat was immediately abandoned. Haji Mirza Aghasi's recklessness and prodigality had fanned into flame and the smoldering fires of discontent, had exasperated the masses and encouraged them to stir up sedition and mischief. The most turbulent elements in Khorasan that inhabited the regions of Kashan, Bujnud, and Shiravan leagued themselves with the Salar, son of the Asif Daoli, the elder maternal uncle of the Shah and governor of the province, and repudiated the authority of the central government. Whatever forces were dispatched from the capital met with immediate defeat at the hands of the chief instigators of the rebellion. Jafar Kuli Khan Namdar and Amir Arslan Khan, son of the Salar, who conducted the operations against the forces of the Shah, displayed the utmost cruelty and, having repulsed the attacks of the enemy, mercilessly put their captives to death.
Whilst in Marku, things have now eased a little bit. Ali Khan, the governor, is on side. He's essentially in love with the Bab, completely blown away. Sheikh Hassan al-Zunusi reports that when the Bab would chant his prayers, that this would reverberate, would echo through the mountain and people could hear. More and more of the disciples of the Bab now were allowed to come into Marku and see him because Ali Khan had totally relaxed things. He's like, cool, you want to come and see the Bab? Fantastic. Beframah, please come. It seems that these people were allowed to stay in what became the first ever 3-day visits. So they would come to Marku, they would stay for 3 days, after which His Holiness the Bab would send them back to where they came from and said, please go and consolidate the faith, please spread the message. That's what's more important. So they get 3 days with His Holiness the Bab, which would just blow your mind if you imagine that. Talks about Ali Khan really looking after the Bab, that he'd get him whatever he wanted, the finest fruit he'd get, whatever it was he could do for the Bab, he just could not do enough. He stayed the summer, and in the winter it was so cold that even the copper implements started to get affected by this. The water for his ablutions was absolutely freezing cold. Sayyid Hussein Yazdi was asked to read from the Mohira Gulab, these passages in which the Bab is crying, because the Bab is remembering the tragedies of Imam Hussein and how Imam Hussein in the Battle of Karbala was affected, how he was attacked and everything, and he's just crying profusely. But he's also thinking about the upcoming troubles that are going to happen to the next Hussein. The next Hussein obviously referring to Mirza Hussein Ali. So quite often we see the Bab, like I said, when he was in Karbala before and he was crying, it was absolutely because of the troubles that Imam Hussein had encountered, but also he was aware of what the next Hussein, Mirza Hussein Ali, was about to endure. The Bab says that in the year 60, he talks about this image he had. This image where he essentially gets his revelation, he's spoken to him, where he drinks the blood of the severed head of Imam Hussein. We know that Muhammad Shah had sent the Bab to prison along with Haji Mirza Aghasi. And again, as previously mentioned, this is when Iran starts taking a big downturn. In the province of Khorasan, which is the capital Mashhad, in Khorasan, we know in Kuchan, in Bujnud, in Shiravan, there's all these rebellions where the son of the Asfadullah, basically with the maternal uncle of the Shah, starts trying to go against the central government. So there's all sorts of problems. And so it says whenever the forces were dispatched from the capitals, they were defeated by the chief instigators of the rebellion. So Jafar Kuli Khan and Amdar and Amir Arslan Khan. So the son of the Salah. So they basically were completely against the government. Now there's internal problems that's going on. There's other wars that are going on, the rest of it, and things are going down ever since this all took place.
I had never noticed this before, but the Bab is declaring that his intimation took place 1 year before his declaration. Apparently, 1843 was when he had the intimation dream.
Correct.
Thank you. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, we will draw our session to a close. Thank you all for joining us tonight. The story continues. The story gets bigger. Again, His Holiness the Bab is in Marku. He is in the prison. Things are starting to get crazy. They're starting to heat up. We will continue in a couple of days.
I implore thee by the splendor of the light of thy glorious face, the majesty of thine ancient grandeur, and the power of thy transcendent sovereignty, to ordain for us at this moment every measure of that which is good and seemly, and to destine for us every portion of the outpourings of thy grace. For granting of gifts doth not cause thee loss, nor doth the bestowing of favors diminish thy wealth. Glorified art thou, O Lord. Verily I am poor, while in truth thou art rich. Verily I am lowly, while in truth thou art almighty. Verily I am impotent, while in truth thou art powerful. Verily I am abased, while in truth thou art the most exalted. Verily I am distressed, while in truth thou art the Lord of might.